enough. Trial is alone.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Dr. Deep State with Will Tucker and Dr. Haugen. We have a special guest in the house today, Dr. Thaddeus Kozinski. So I'm going to do a brief introduction for Dr. Kozinski. Dr. Kozinski is a philosopher. He's a public intellectual. He's a Californian, but don't hold that against him.
New Yorker by origin.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Long Island. I'm a Long Island. Me and Anthony, all Long Island guys.
Oh my God, and my wife as well. I did not know that about you. Okay,
Now
it's
you
over
do.
there.
Yeah.
So, Dr. Kozinski has been published in many notable publications. His latest work these days is on Substack, where I think he's become a singular voice in talking about many of the critical issues of our time. He can incorporate both a deep state perspective, but in particular, he's able to find a moral and theological foundation from which to view the world that I think is amazingly unique and distinctive. And that is what we want to tap into today with Dr. Kozinski. In particular, his article, Well-Being versus Salvation. Before I continue, I want to also mention a book that was a favorite of mine, Modernity as Apocalypse, 2019. I took whole sections and just put them into my publication because I thought the two fit so well together. So I'm a huge fan of Dr. Kozinski and think he's a very, very important voice in our world today. So we're going to talk about his lens, about the necessity to see the world through the lens of salvation as opposed to well-being. But we're going to tap on a few current issues in the church and in the world at large. So Dr. Kozinski, before I forget, I was honored to have him do the foreword to my book, and I read the foreword and I thought, oh my goodness, he understands the book more than I do. That was kind of scary. But without any further ado, we are delighted to have you here today, Dr. Kozinski.
Thanks so much, Doug and Will. It's a pleasure to be back. At pretty much everything you just said, I want to throw back to you. That's true about you and your work and Will's as well. And that's why I think we like each other. We're of similar mind and intention here, and so it's really fun and nice to be together. We need to be together and to know that we exist, and as things get worse and worse and darker, and so great channel and great book, and well, let's talk.
All righty.
Yeah.
I might have you just tug your camera just a little bit lower. And
if I can.
Is that okay? Okay. I think you're good just like that. Okay.
A little bit lower. Is that better at all?
Yeah, you're cued in there. Pretty good.
Actually, I can do this.
There we go. There we go.
Actually, hold on a sec. I could fix it. I have it on a thing. How's that?
There we go. Excellent. Well, Will's got a few questions for us, kind of ideas cooked up. Some ideas, although I'm the Dr. Deep State kind of channel person, I try to stay away from real black pill kind of stuff, like just that stuff's dark. But like as we think about what's going on in the world today, I think about things that there's a pattern about things that have been censored that you can't talk about. And I'm talking about mostly medical things, actually. And when you kind of string together these kind of things and the warnings we're getting and the sort of preconditioning, it's uniquely scary, I think, that 2024. And I do think it's so important for us right now. The world wants us to kind of get emotional and hyped up. And it's so important for us to kind of tap into, well, what is this frame of mind to really get our minds, bodies, and spirits centered on this inaugurated eschatology, this kind of foot in the door that we have. And and to really kind of like how in practical terms do we kind of think about approaching both the reality of our times and people that live in this, in this inaugurated eschatology, in this, we have a foot in the door in the millennial kingdom. I'm going to kick it over to you, Will. Is there anything in particular you'd like to start out asking Dr. Kozinski?
I just wanted to highlight more than ask, to try to get the conversation rolling. We want to focus on a recent article series that he's working on toward a book on this paradigm that he's proposed of well-being versus salvation. And this essay that we've been we're going to discuss today, I'm going to read a brief excerpt to kind of give the audience a taste of what it's about. We live within a global culture of well-being, an elite imposed and artificial totalitarian therapeutic prison. And this means that through an inexorable, ineluctable, and inescapable cultural conditioning process, well-being is the default position of the collective consciousness. Charles Taylor, who Doug also references in Pursuit of the Metaverse, calls it the immanent frame. We are meant by our puppeteer conditioners to know of nothing other. If we do not deliberately fight to resist and escape this conditioning, it will mold and poison our souls unconsciously. But even if we somehow become acquainted while within this prison with a salvific mode of consciousness through, say, encountering traditional religion or reading classic literature or meeting a living saint, we are programmed to translate this experience into the discourse, grammar, and social imaginary of well-being, thereby turning it into its opposite. So thinking through this dichotomy that Dr. Kozinski proposes, I started thinking about it as like the current thing versus the eternal thing, where we have this kind of psychic hold of the current thing that sort of reigns in society and puts it into this therapeutic prison. I like the way you put that, because it kind of echoes of biopolitics and Foucault's idea of the medical system, which is like this self-reinforcing mode of imprisoning our minds within what we feel or we come to believe our self-interest, but was actually in our interest is something that's transcendent and outside of the immanent frame. So I'd like to hand it off from there.
Yeah, well, so I mean, a lot of what I'm writing about is just trying to get a handle on what this dichotomy is, and it's not like it's anything we haven't heard before. I mean, it's basically following God's will or doing your will, or being Catholic or not being Catholic, and I guess it occurred to me though that it's a good way to understand what we're dealing with at this time. It seems to me that if you want to like narrow everything down, the temptation of the evil one right now is to make you choose something other than the truth. You can still choose truth, but you're not making it the priority. Always priority, no matter what. Now, I'm not saying that means you have to say the truth all the time, like everything you think. I mean, that's not what I mean. I just mean that in the way you live your life, every moment, you're asking the question, what am I doing right now? Is it in accordance with reality? Every conversation, everything you write, every act you do, every work, every pressure you give into or not, every decision you make, you're just constantly putting that in front of your mind. Do I know what's true? Do I need to do some inquiry? And if I do, am I really putting it first? Now, I mean, why would you do that? Okay, I mean, it's one thing to be able to do that once you realize you should, but I think the main issue here is that how many people are being tempted to think that that's not really what they should be doing, and they don't know why they should do that. Because if you think about it, the only person that's really going to be impressed by this is God. At some point, like no one's going to care but you and God if you're doing this. So if you're not really connected to God as as, you know, the only person you're living for and the only real person in your existence, you're not going to do it. And there's so many temptations not to do it, to look like you're doing it, even convince yourself you're doing it. Um, and I just think so. What does this truth have to do with salvation? Well, that is the mode of salvation. It's when the truth is number one and nothing else, and you realize that that's the only way you can live. And if you don't, if you put it second, you're going to be swept off your feet very quickly, and you may not even recognize what you've been doing and what you're where you are right now. This mode of salvation is like a flicker of light you're holding of a candle, and it's very easy to go out. And it just seems to me that everything we're seeing is, if you want to look at what's the root of the treason we went through in 2020, what is it? What is the root of it? It's that everyone was tempted, and many, the vast majority, failed to put truth first, and they had all the excuses in the world to do it. But that's what they did, and they committed treason against truth, and that therefore they committed treason against, uh, especially those under their authority and those they had care for, which caused so much evil and victimization just because people decided at some time that there was something else more important than the truth. So I have a whole section on that in one of the parts of the article about the pandemic and how that relates to the mode of salvation versus the mode of well-being. So yeah, that's kind of the you know the heart of it.
Yeah, I think you're getting right into, so many questions came up. Yes, there's truth. And what played out with the lockstep universal approach to, it's so, this, for eyes to see, um, this, the curtains are open on this age of deception where the world system is literally inverting, telling what's good is bad and what's bad is good. And, the first things that kind of come to our mind is, they like these nice grannies or nice age or parents in church, and they're wearing their mask and they're doing their thing and they're listening along. And they seem, and you just look at them and they seem really, they look a lot more holy than I do, it's kind of like hard to point a finger. But like as time goes on and, the people that got us into this, you realize they're lying here and they're lying here. Our politicians are lying here and lying here. And yet we come back and there seems to be this slavishness about putting ourselves under the authority of these liars. But when you kind of cut right into it, to me, it's like there seems to be, I think there's people, and you make this distinction in your article, there's people that truly love truth that aren't Christians, but we'll deal in our orbit right now. That I just feel in this age of deception that the Bible prophesizes, that how do you shield yourself? How do you become immune to the snares of the devil? I can't think of a better way to say it than you just did. I mean, really, Christ has to be number one. And where you kind of see maybe the rubber hits the road, we all unconsciously do these cost benefit analysis each day, each moment. What's going to give me the most pleasure and the least pain? When what you're talking about is sometimes they can go hand in hand. The truth will give you pleasure in this world or heavenly. But there's a lot of times when the decision is, this is going to cost me. This is not going to hit the algorithms right. This is, maybe my neighbor's not going to talk to me anymore. And those are the times I think that Jesus is saying, or even St. Paul, when you run the race, you got to be prepared for those kind of things. And if church culture has become this culture of the world or the spectacle, it's kind of telling it, yeah, it's okay. And well, that's kind of not really a politically correct thing to talk about anyway. And even other Christians are going to. So there's so many kind of ways we can say that the unabashed truth that seems to have been falling year by year, decade by decade for at least 50 years has kind of almost culminated in this point where it's this question, I think, really does need to be asked for the sake of our salvation and those around us that we love and pray for.
That's very well said. Thanks. it got me thinking. I want to complicate the issue a bit. I just read a great article on the Josiah. That's Father Waldstein's journal on integralism, Father Pater Waldstein. It's by Thomas Pink. If you may know him, he's an English scholar. On a lot of he did a lot of work on Digitalis Humanae, and one of his main theses is that um, the church is a potestas. It is a city that has legal authority and that can use coercion on the baptized. Okay, and that's a traditional church teaching. In other words, to keep them to their promises and to do what it takes to keep them faithful and to obey their promises that they made in baptism or in confirmation. But he also says the state is a potestas, and what a potestas does is it is an authority for truth. Okay, the whole idea of the state as being a mere coordinator of vector forces of power that is a kind of necessary evil because we need someone to set the speed limit after all. We can't all decide on, we need the one decider, right? Well, that's part of the state's responsibility, but the ultimate responsibility of the political community and its authority, legal authority, is literally to coerce its citizens into the truth. Now, that sounds like the worst thing you could ever hear if you're liberal at all. But coercion doesn't mean coaction. Make the distinction. Coaction is violent force. Coercion just means using whatever tools at its disposal to have as an end result that you actually believe in the faith, for instance, and you actually live it. That's all coercion means. Rewards and punishments, incentives, social conditioning. And that's what the city does. The political community's job, and this is all in Aristotle and Plato, is to use its legal power and its culture forming power to get you to believe the truth about what human flourishing is, what the common good is. You have to know what it is, and then you have to love it. And the state's job is to promote that truth so that you become virtuous. It's a classical understanding of political authority. Okay, you get it? So if that's the case, then we have a natural deference to political authority because we need it in order to shape our minds to know what's good. Okay, this is not libertarianism here. This is classical Thomistic political uh, philosophy. It's in Leo the 13th. It's in St. Thomas. It's in Plato and Aristotle, Augustine, and Aquinas. Okay, so why am I bringing this up? Because it occurred to me the other day just how hardwired we are, despite Locke and the Enlightenment, to defer to political authority. It's not because people are stupid or sheep or wimpy or they don't want to think for themselves. I mean, that might be part of the reason they do it, but the main reason is because we need it to help us know what's good and true. Okay, if that's the case, when it commits treason, okay, when the political authorities um, decide deliberately, maliciously to do the opposite of what they're supposed to do, to become an anti-authority,
Yeah.
there is so much damage that is done. Okay, it's incalculable. It's almost unspeakable that could happen because it sets everyone else up to fail. Now, if that's as bad as I'm saying it is, what if the church does this, um, for which we are, from which we are, on which we are dependent for the truth and goodness of our very salvation and soul, and both institutions, to a certain extent, the state much more, have committed treason. Now, the answer to this is you might say, "Oh, that's fine. Just become a libertarian. Go look at the internet and figure out what's true." Okay, yeah, you have to do that. But how many people are equipped to do that? How many people would just fall into some idolatry or error when they try to do that? In other words, it seems to me to be a kind of insoluble problem. When the authorities that we depend on in a political community commit treason, there's really no solution. I mean, I don't know what the solution is. And the same thing with the church. And I think that's why E. Michael Jones, let me just say this, is holding on to fiducia discipline as not teaching error because I think he doesn't know what to do if this is actually what people are saying it is. This is the church defecting, or at least the Pope defecting, but as Pope and in some magisterial way, leading to a kind of situation that was analogous to the scandemic and their treason. So, look, I want to bring that up not because I think I have the solution, it's because I don't have the solution. And it's a
Okay,
paradox. It's a problem. I don't know if you feel what I'm saying. It's a paradox.
let me try.
Right.
And I think you mentioned E. Michael Jones' name. Maybe we want to circle around and talk about some of that. Myself, part of my evolution is I've become an integralist, and I just an unqualified. I don't see any in between. But with this fiction of the Hobbesian Locke fiction of a
Yeah.
social contract, it's brace.
Right.
It's kind of predicated on an assumption that there's done with sort of goodwill. It's a contract, so to speak. Of course, God's covenant gives us a type of contract that should hopefully guide, and that was the case with the internal integrated world of the Catholic social hierarchy. With the social contract, so first of all, I think it's a total fiction. It's a tacit consent that we give. So basically, if we're not rebelling, we must be obeying political authority, which is ultimately really the will to the power of the oligarchs. But that
Yes.
said, so the social contract here, one party has really reneged on this, if there was any goodwill. And we are living in a time right now, we're talking right now in a context when this dominant power in the world over in the Middle East is committing democide in our face. In the West, our political leadership have wholesale endorsed it. Of course, on the other side of their mouths, they might have said something else. They have, in a sense, where it's so plain. This is why the trigger seems to be set, because you can't go backwards with this kind of information. That we're living right now in a time where if the West, through American leadership, ever had any legitimacy, it was because they had some kind of at least comparative moral authority vis-a-vis other countries. Now, in this context, this in the context of that the dominant forces that impose the international rules in the community have left the building in terms of their morality. They've demonstrated that they are completely bankrupt. Anybody that challenges them, they will censor them. They will allow people to lose their livelihood simply for taking what's going on there and putting it on the same standard you would for any other political regime in the world. And it's hard to not ignore that. So the people, like our leadership, some church authorities in various denominations, some including Catholicism, are actually supporting this effort, pulling it back to the social contract. Where does that leave us? And then you put that piece in there, and let's parallel this, because the Vatican seems to be following in the footsteps of this agenda, moving us toward 2030 and so forth. How do we make sense of this? Well, you're struggling with this. I'm certainly not saying I have the answer, but if we're truly compelled by truth. There was a time and a place, I think, where we could have said, well, just be a good American and take care of yourself and don't get yourself in trouble. I think we need to up the antes on our sense of this social contract and simply start saying, no, that's not God's way. This is not truth. And whether we have to speak it or privately resist, we are living in, yes, when we think of, there's an intersection now between church and state where the social contract that has been present for several centuries is broken.
Well,
Go
that's
ahead.
great. I mean, look, it's broken, and there's no political authority right now. Okay, it doesn't exist. We don't have a polity.
Not legitimate. No, not
That's what I
legitimate.
mean. And we're not meant to live without it. Okay, we're not meant to live without it. We can't live without it. Okay, so you can have de facto political authority in your family, in your small communities, but it's really makeshift. It's ersatz. I mean, it doesn't have legal power. It doesn't have. So I mean, honestly, we're living in a very defective situation for human flourishing. Okay, that's obvious. But let me just add to what I said before. So on the one hand, it seems to me that we're hardwired to obey legitimate political authority, not just when it tells us the speed limit, but also when it tells us what's true. I mean, that's what Thomas Pink is arguing. Not that we're brainless obedient to some political authority. But there's a sense in which its job is to teach about the common good because it has the purview, and it's supposed to be aristocrats who rule and they know truth and they're teachers, okay, and they're able to shape us in a certain way. We have to be we defer to these things, and by deferring to their authority, it helps us to learn what's good and true, and to internalize it and become virtuous. On the other hand, we never give up our critical thinking ability. There's a Socratic element, right? Where does the Socratic fit into this? Because on the one hand, political authority is an authority. On the other hand, it's not the ultimate authority. What's the ultimate authority? Reality. Reality, supernatural and natural. We have access to that. Every person has access to this. And it's not that it's always completely mediated by the state. That's totalitarianism. We have access to it independent of any other person and any other community. We can't say that we're absolutely dependent on other human beings for this truth. This is not the way we're wired. So on the one hand, we are. On the one hand, we could transcend it. This is why McIntyre talks about the way in which we're tradition constituted rational animals, right? We think within a tradition, so we're dependent on it. But we're also tradition transcendent, okay? Because we can critique it. We can see it in light of reality. This is Platonic, right? You could look at any human thing in light of the good. You can do that because we have access to the good. Okay, so and it reminds me, like, are we in the position of the early Palestinians, the early Jews with Christ, where they were used to deferring to authority, Jews to the Jewish authority, Romans to Roman authority. That was natural. They were supposed to. Jesus comes and he presents himself as like the very standard of judgment for all authority. And by looking to him and knowing him, they found that the normal authorities were found wanting. So this is revolutionary. This is, in a sense, revolutionary to public order, to political authority. Here's a guy who doesn't really have political authority or ecclesial or temple authority, who is actually becoming a standard higher than those authorities. And it seems to me there's some analogy here today. We have to be able to not become libertarian free thinkers, or we're just gonna do it on our own, like the New Agers, right? Like, we're just gonna like just look, question all authority, right? We can't have that attitude. We have to accept the classical understanding. And yet somehow we also have to transcend this, because right now we have to be able to have unmediated access to what's real so that we can negotiate, and so that we can live the life of salvation, because the authorities that we've been given are corrupt. They're not teaching the truth. Even the church. Now, of course, there is the true magisterium. I know that there's tradition. There's ways to encounter the church, the magisterium, that don't depend on Jorge Bergoglio, okay, and Foucault and these people. I know that. But we have to also avoid the temptation to a kind of traditionalist Gnosticism, right? That's dangerous. So anyway, I'm just trying to say, I think this dialectic has to involve, like you said, a new way of approaching existentially the situation we're in that avoids the trap, that avoids the dialectical trap that you mention a lot in your book and in your speeches. And I'm just trying to figure out what it is. It's not, there's no formula for it, right? There's no and listen, I have to tell you, like, when you see the guys you've trusted drop the ball, the people you did trust, who you thought were impervious to these traps, kind of dropped the ball. I mean, it's been pretty traumatic for me to see Jones drop the ball on the fiducia. I don't know what to make of it. And it's maybe God's saying, look, don't have a cult of personality here. Don't, you kind of got to do this on your own in a way, but don't do it on your own in the wrong way. Like, I don't know. I don't know if I'm making any sense. I'm just trying to speak about what's on my heart here, because this year is going to be a doozy. I can feel it. I could feel something coming. And I want to make sure that I'm gonna pass the test that God's gonna give me.
Yeah.
And these tests are getting harder and harder. Okay. And I don't know, God is like forcing us to choose him. I mean, he's making it pretty clear and he's not gonna stop. So I don't know. And go ahead. And Will jump in if you want to, whatever
Yeah,
on anything.
I'm gonna turn it over to Will. I do. I think it comes back to sort of a mystery here, but when Christ kind of is throwing out a new paradigm, he would say, for those with ears to hear. And so the question is, I think we all want salvation. We all want to have those ears. And it kind of brings us back to the cave. You know, you need the grace to get that to some extent, but you have to cooperate with the grace that you're getting. And it's kind of like Renee would say, you know, everything kind of comes with both the good, the wonderful, and the terrible at the same time. Having all the algorithms love you for saying the right things can build you up. And then at the same time, your ego and your discernment and your aversion to truth can go as you become more popular. But yet,
Yeah.
when you do want to speak the truth, you have this voice, and you get both worlds at the same time. Will, I'll flip it over to you. What do you got to say?
Yeah, I really enjoyed what you're saying there about the Thomas Pink article. I'm not sure if this is the same one where he talks about this drift between the official authority and the magisterial authority, and how those two things are kind of pitted against each other as we gradually move toward um,
Mm.
what you're calling treason. I like the way that you avoid the heresy term by calling it treason. And the duty of the potentis is to order us toward the salvific mode. And so
Right.
in the absence of that, and we have the treason of our authorities, then we're left with seeking it on our own. And then now we have this series of treasonous compromises that the authorities have made with, you know, the forces of the world. First with the scamdemic, and then now with the fiducia supplicans. And
Mm.
so you were talking about what to make of this. I was just thinking about the fullness of the Gentiles being, you know, an allegory for the temporal and the spiritual order being pointed toward the good, the salvific mode. And now that that's fallen away, maybe it signals kind of the fall of the Gentile order, and we're in this kind of
Yeah,
space in between.
it does.
So
What does that
Thaddeus,
mean? What does that suggest? Yeah. Oh. Mm.
so I think Will's got a couple questions, but since the name has gone up, so when you first kind of heard the Dr. E. Michael Jones take on this, you're kind of either with me, against me, if you don't think this is a beautiful document. Did
Well, I
that,
wouldn't
that's
go. I wouldn't go that far. That I
okay.
just think. I think I'm just look. I'm not. Jones has been a helpful thinker for certain areas. He's been willing to go there, and he's helped me in certain areas. I've never been impressed with his understanding of liturgy and the importance of the Tridentine Mass and the problems of Vatican II. He's not been my go-to guy on that issue. But the point is, I guess I don't understand, and it's not that I have to understand, but I guess I'm just seeing that even the people who seem to have the salvific mode, or maybe he still does, it's hard to comprehend the level of lack of understanding, like spiritually, um, that his position entails about this. I'm just baffled by it. It doesn't. The only thing I could think of is that, and this gets to our issue, and this would be somehow exculpatory of him. I think I get it. If you really have a mindset that there can't be anything wrong, that there's got to be some authority here that we can count on. There's got to be one, and the devil's going to do everything to make it seem like this authority is gone. Um, then it must be the case that this document upholds the moral order, because if not, there is no such authority, and I don't know what to do. And I think this is the fear people have with beneventism, whatever that Francis was never the Pope. You know, Patrick Coffin and Ann Barnhart and these people and Edmund Mazda. Because at that point, I think people just sense that they can't live without this. And you know, there's a good argument to be made for that, of course. But again, what is the truth? So if you look at if you're interested in the truth, forget the emotions, forget what you need, forget what you just look at the document. What is it saying? Well, it obviously is saying that there's no doubt about this. It's contradicting itself, number one, of course, it's self-contradictory, but the upshot is unambiguously that couples who are sodomite couples are being blessed. Like couples are being blessed, not individuals. There's no other meaning of that than that is somehow endorsing the sin of sodomy. I mean, am I crazy that it's not that clear? Yes, no. I mean,
Yeah, I mean,
I
right. Why
missed
else does the document need to exist other than why does it need to be written except for that purpose?
There's no other reason to have it written at all, and that's so obvious. So when the document says it, doesn't it say at some point that it's not supporting, it's not endorsing homosexual sin, or it's not endorsing sin or something? Like it says that somewhere, right?
Uh-huh.
Well, that's what Jones is saying. He's saying because it says that, it doesn't do it.
Yeah, that brings to mind something that you wrote in the foreword to the In Pursuit of the Metaverse. If you don't mind me,
Yeah, go ahead.
here, unless you had another thought you wanted to get out.
No, that's all right.
Okay. And so this oscillation between contradictions, and I think this is kind of the MO of the modernist strategy of assaulting reason. And so you say here, following up a longer quote about liberalism and sort of moral relativism. It says matter is all there is, well, except for my mind, which is free. And you're saying this in a mocking tone, I guess I should.
Right, yeah.
Which is free and limitless, though determined by economics. But I'm free. And truth is the opinion of the powerful, which is oppressive and untrue unless I'm in power, or perhaps it's the opinion of the marginalized. And all opinions are equal except those that aren't, like science and critical race theory. And as far for morality, it's relative, period, except for racism and sexism and homophobia, which are absolute evils. And MAGA is evil, but good and evil are the labels of the intolerant or the rationalizations of class consciousness. But vaccines are absolutely good, and people should be forced to get them, and Putin is evil. And we today in the 21st century are morally superior to everyone who lived before us, except that we're all equal, and abortion is good. So it should be imposed on everyone, but morality is relative. Freedom is the good, and good is freedom, except for the freedom to try to make something other than freedom the good, which must be stopped by force if need be. And then you go on to say, spiritually, the simulacrum allows us to believe in love or power or both or nothing. So this, proposal and the negation.
Yeah.
The diversity of religions is willed by God. It tells us, except for those religions that claim to be the true religion, which God, who probably doesn't exist because we are God, hates. Jesus was a nice man and a good moral teacher, but some of his disciples were anti-Semitic, such as St. John and Crusades, Inquisition, Nazism, Trump. We know this now and have sought or demanded forgiveness and groveling, and that's why we love Pope Francis. The universal religion of love is sweeping across the planet as we await its definitive spokesperson. The lockdowns are the first fruits of the new spirit, bringing us all together in sacrificial love and science, and the vaccine is our newest sacrament. So I think this pattern that you're kind of figuring out here is what's called metamodernism. I'm going to read a little bit from that now too. Which is oscillating between contradictions. The prefix meta referred not so much to a reflective stance or a repeated rumination, but to Plato's metaxy, which denotes a movement between meta, opposite poles, as well as beyond meta, them. Vermeulen and Van den Akker described metamodernism as a structure of feeling that oscillates between modernism and postmodernism, like a pendulum swinging between innumerable poles. Ontologically, they write, metamodernism oscillates between the modern and the postmodern. It oscillates between modern enthusiasm and postmodern irony. between hope and melancholy, between naivety and knowingness, empathy and apathy, unity and plurality, totality and fragmentation, purity and ambiguity. Indeed, by oscillating to and fro or back and forth, the metamodern negotiates between the modern and the postmodern. For the metamodern generation, according to Vermeulen, grand narratives are as necessary as they are problematic. Hope is not simply something to distrust, love, not necessarily something to be ridiculed. Luke Turner proposed metamodernism as the mercurial condition between and beyond irony and sincerity, naivety and knowingness, relativism and truth, optimism and doubt, in pursuit of plurality of disparate and elusive horizons, and concluded with a call to go forth and oscillate. So, yeah,
Oh my God.
just because it condemn or it says that we are not endorsing sin, and then it proceeds to endorse sin, doesn't mean it's not operating within this new schizophrenic paradigm.
Yeah, I want to pop in really quick. Like, this is where you see one of the lines in Thaddeus's new article, Well-Being versus Salvation. And he asked themselves, this deep moral question. So the people that are kind of like a good German, just following orders, is it okay just to put yourself under false authority? And Thaddeus says that's the worst thing you can do. And what we see both in the church and with this document and in the world is nothing short of menticide. It's like a deliberate attempt to drive people mad.
Yes,
And
yes.
somehow we have to figure out a way to render to Caesar what Caesar's, but keep our frame of mind and our eyes on the prize of salvation at the same time. Thaddeus, I want to have you respond.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I'm not even sure what to say. I think that yeah, driving us to madness. Hmm.
The church is
So
partaking in that. That's kind of, it's evil. You know how some people can say, well, look at this part of the document. And you just have to say to these splainers, like, shouldn't these contradictions from one paragraph to the next, do you not see a pattern here? And and then there's a Kabbalistic feature to all this, including the dissipation of the boundaries of gender and X, Y, and Z
yeah,
as
I mean,
well.
there's a great quote at the end of Crime and Punishment. Raskolnikov has a dream. I quoted this in one of my articles. I don't know if you ever read that, but the dream is where there's some disease that everyone gets, and they all become completely sure of their opinion, but they're all insane, and they can't talk to each other. It's amazing depiction of what Dostoevsky was saying, and what's going to happen, and it's incredible. So yeah, you're right. That is what's happening. The problem is everyone are people become siloed, as we know, and they may be mad to one extent or another, meaning they're detached from reality, for whatever reason, to some extent. But they surround themselves with those who have a similar detachment, and they come up with strategies to convince themselves that they're right and they're wrong. And it's like it's just endless, and it's happening everywhere in every kind of milieu, both within the church and without. Um, so again, like, what do we do? I mean, they are definitely trying this mode of madness. And what you said was right, Will. It's definitely the. I mean, it's one thing to say like, I'm going to be vigilant. I'm going to make sure I don't get, caught up in this. But there's just so much of that you can do. That could drive you mad. That could drive you crazy. Just having that constant paranoia. I don't know. What do you guys think about what could we do? What could we do with it?
Well, my priest likes to kind of come back to the same kind of idea, and he's a hell and brimstone priest. I really love the guy, but he's always his favorite is this idea we're going to come to the pearly great gates, and who wants to hear Christ say, "Depart from me, you workers of iniquity, I do not know you," and he just stresses. And I'm just trying to keep something on a simple plane, and we can work from there. But what else can you do except each week strive for virtue and try to pull away from vice, because obviously sin makes us stupid. So as a starter, if we had to rely on scripture and tradition, that's a great starting point, because sometimes the more we sometimes even dig and try to look for truth, sometimes, it's painful, and sometimes that confusion can just maybe overwhelm us. But as a starting point, when somebody's when the world and the world system is trying to break you, that's one of the themes of the metaverse. Traditionally, we work toward virtue, we work for holiness, we continue to prepare ourselves for the Eucharist. And although that might sound corny to some people, or this kind of knee-jerk Catholic thing to say, I can't come up with anything better. I mean, I really can't. That was the system that Christ ordained in our world. This is where he lives in our worlds. We have to seek the Eucharist. We have to get increasingly holy with our lives. And I think the fruits of that will be that Christ will, but we have to hunger for it. And it goes back to the initial thing. How do you truly put Christ first? And whatever we're doing when we're approaching, the more holy we get ourselves in preparation for that, the more I think God will give us the tools moment by moment that we need. Unless you want to respond, Thaddeus, I think Will's got a couple great.
Go ahead, Will. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I was just thinking. One of the things that you're talking about in the well-being versus salvation article is how well-being in this current age, which is so governed by the paradigm of well-being, masks as salvation. So even whenever we put something the public view as salvific, it immediately becomes a virtue signal and gets swallowed up in this kind of capital. It becomes capital for a kind of self-promotion and and like you're talking about here as well, like being an influencer and speaking about these things, and like talking about the JQ. At a certain point, it's like, am I just being an edgelord and trying say the most say the most difficult thing possible?
Yeah.
Just cause
how would you know if you fell into that trap? Like, you probably wouldn't know it, because everyone's going to be your audience. Like, there's just not going to be much external confirmation that you've fallen into the edgelord trap. And that's what I'm seeing. It's really difficult to have feedback now about what the state of your soul, what mode are you in. It's scary. Like, the feedback mechanisms, normal ones, are just going away. It just reminds me of what Guardini says at the end of the modern world book, where he says that, in this apocalyptic times, he prophesies, there'll be, I'm paraphrasing, like, people who are far and few between, who know the love of Christ somehow, and they have it, and they will be sort of refuges for others who have no idea what they're doing. And those people with that love, they're kind of mystics, right? They have this connection. They won't even know each other much. They'll be alone. Like, whoa. It's like the Book of Eli, if you watch that movie. It's a pretty good movie, by the way, about apocalyptic times. But yeah, so what I'm saying, well, I interrupted you. I'm sorry. I just wanted to make that point, though, of just how hard it is to figure that out, But go ahead, but finish what you were saying.
Oh no, that was I was finished. That was good. I
Okay.
like what you're saying. Yeah.
The edgelord. Yeah, and I mean, some people are thinking that's kind of what's going on with Jones, because how else to explain um, this I don't know, this kind of temporary insanity. It's hard for me to understand it, even the way he's responding. So I'm just saying, I mean, I pray for him, but it makes you wonder how many other influencers are going to go down in a way. I mean, maybe he's going to come back up, and I don't know, but this is a pretty severe. I mean, this, to me, what's happened in Fiducia is the church coming out finally and really exposing itself, like going too far, you might say. Like, it's so obvious now
And it's happening in lockstep in what's going on in the state in the Middle East. It's just
It
coming out of
is.
the closet, and it's just saying.
Fiducia is the church's Gaza. Yeah, in a way, right? You're right.
And here's where we get to the salvation part. If putting ourselves under these false authorities can damn us in the sake of well-being because it's expedient or it works out in the
Yeah,
cost-benefit analysis for ourselves, so these are part of the trying times. But yes, they're telling you in a metaphysical way, because if you consent to this, you are consenting to be led by these psychopaths that have nothing, that they're working for their father, the devil of lies, and his goal is to take as many souls to hell as possible. And if you can't even see that, like if you really think that the D's or the R's over here, your red team and the blue team, one of them is going to have my back,
right.
and it's menticide. And part of what's going, part of going crazy, the textbook definition is that you don't see it in yourself because you're
Right.
so consumed by well-being, which is just another way of just making sure your belly's fed. It's maybe a fancier way of saying that, but it can, as Will suggested, it disguises itself as salvation, because
Yeah.
the transcendent frame has been so squished that just appears. And of course, this is the idea of the simulacrum. It's our innate desire to have legitimate authority or need legitimate authority, and our need to really see ultimately that authority in the logos. When that gets crunched, then it gets shifted to all other things that are secondary and ultimately false, because they're not directed toward salvation and toward Christ's kingship.
Yeah,
Will,
I think
Will,
I remember what I was going to say now. Back to Jones for a moment. He's always talking about the cunning of reason. And what his read on like what's happening in Gaza is, oh, they've overplayed their hand now, and now the world is seeing who they really. And maybe there's a bit of truth there, but I also think there's a bit of naivety, which he sees these conflicts, like conflict resolution, always ends in like logos or in there being some sort of that reason is always triumphs in these conflicts. And I'm reminded of you talk about Job in the well-being versus salvation article, and Job's friends who come to him and say, you're suffering, it's obviously because you're doing something wrong. And I think we get in this trap when we experience suffering, thinking that like it's indicative of some sort of personal sin or some sort of demonic incursion, and it's not just suffering for its own sake. And so we want to figure it out. Or you think also about like how we're warned not to be conspicuous when we're fasting and when we're doing penances. It's like we're really programmed not to want to suffer silently and invisibly. And what you're talking about with mysticism or mystics who support other people through their own spiritual life, like offering up our suffering in silence. And obviously we have ample opportunities to suffer in this new age that we're in, and with all the threats and the lack of authority that we're enduring on a daily basis. So,
and I want to stick in there really quick, Thaddeus. In your article, you mentioned like in the paradigm of well-being that can pose as salvation and salvation itself. One of the key differences is the mode of well-being is about taking cost benefit. It doesn't require pain. In fact, it works best if you're comfortable and can show everybody your selfies and your lifestyle and stuff like that. The salvation one necessitates, it needs pain, it needs suffering.
Yeah,
And growth in anything, we know this is a parallel or an analog in the biological world. Even a plant, in order to grow, needs struggle. My struggle. So with our lives, every time our mind, because we've been so influenced by this world system, wants to skirt that, to have an attitude that we not only can kind of see this is necessary, this is God talking to me through this suffering, this is absolutely necessary for my salvation. And when our minds can see that and go, yes, and then perhaps even embrace it, And that's, of course, what's so great about the Catholic perspective is being able to offer it up, but also to see it as a road sign. And the samples, the examples of the saints, of course, there's no saint that's going to kick back and say, wow, was everything a gravy train, knight me. But I do think that is the critical component when we think about what mode we're in. How do you deal when not just life gives you a curveball, but when obviously the authorities, what we expected as legitimate authority in church and state has now showed their butt, showed their ugly face to us. It's painful, because it's confusing. So what do you do with that? And that's part of the process. But what you want to know is first and foremost, to get on the salvation train, to embrace truth, and to realize it's necessarily going to come with conflict, struggle, and difficulty. It's not going to be easy. Thaddeus, any thoughts on that?
Well, I like that passage from the psychiatrist I mentioned at the beginning, who wrote the book Marriage, Heaven or Hell. What is it? Guggenheim Craig, Adolf Craig. That's a nice summary of the what you just said too. So it's in the beginning. It's like the second paragraph. I think that'll be good to read.
Do you want me to read it? I've got it here.
Yeah.
You okay?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Okay, here. Clearly not belonging to the state of well-being are tensions, dissatisfactions, painful emotions, anxiety, hatred, difficult and insoluble internal and external conflicts, obsessive searching for an undiscoverable truth, confused struggles about God, and the felt need to come to terms with evil and death. Sickness most certainly does not belong to the state of well-being. It is much easier, at any rate, for physically and psychologically healthy people to enjoy a sense of well-being than it is for the sick. Give us our daily bread really implies give us daily our sense of well-being. As goals, salvation and well-being contradict each other. The path to happiness does not necessarily include suffering. For the sake of our well-being, we are urged to be happy and not to break our heads with questions that have no answer. A happy person sits at the family table among loved ones and enjoys a hearty meal. A person who seeks salvation wrestles with God, the devil, and the world, and confronts death, even if all of this is not absolutely necessary at the precise moment.
Yeah, you can have a good meal and have a good time, of course, but that's not the point. You know what he's saying. Yeah, I make the case that like well-being is part of God's gifts to us. But again, there's a big but there, right? I mean, yeah, I mean, there's a reason why we have the ascetical tradition, why Jesus says, "Blessed are you when you're not feeling well-being, you're not laughing, when you're not feasting." It's not that those are bad. In fact, sometimes they're essential. There's a great movie called Babette's Feast. You ever see that?
Yeah, that's from back in the early 90s.
Yeah, Babette's Feast is a movie about this small town. Where is it take place? Oh my gosh, I wish I was better with details. Somewhere in Scandinavia, I think. A little Calvinist Christian kind of enclave, and basically they're ascetic. They're Calvinist ascetics. They don't enjoy good food. Their community life is not great. They're trying to live the life of monks in a way, but they're Calvinists. And so a woman comes there and visits, and she won the lottery, and she doesn't tell them. She comes from Germany or France, maybe she comes from France. I'm getting the details wrong, but she's a world-class chef. So she goes there because I think I'm probably getting something wrong, but maybe her husband died or something, and she just wants to go and escape. And she goes there and starts to live there, and she recognizes the problems with this place. And she could leave and go back and become a chef again, I think, but she decides to spend her whole lottery earnings on making this ridiculous meal for them, like the best meal they've ever had. And she's like the best chef in France. So she spends like a lot of money, and the end of the movie is they show them feasting, and suddenly with the wine and the great food and just the beauty of it all, a lot of their internecine squabbles start to fade away. So it's a metaphor for, Catholicism as being a feast, right? And literally enjoying, like that's just like was it Belloc, the Catholic Church is a glass of wine and a cigar and a big steak, right? Like so we have to get this straight. Like the way of salvation isn't some neurotic pleasure hating, self hating kind of thing. It coincides with joy and with goods of this world if that in the right time and place, right?
No.
We got to import that. But again, what's the essential thing here? It's what's first things first, um,
Yeah.
right? I mean, we have to make sure we remember that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the pursuit of happiness is evasive. I think about there's a Henry David Thoreau quote where he says that happiness is like a butterfly. If you chase it, it'll evade you. But if you turn your mind to other things, it'll come and rest on your shoulder. So
Yeah.
well-being as an ends, seeking
Yes.
the fruits of the salvific mode without the branch and the labor and the toil of generating them. It creates a society that's constantly psychotic and
By
full.
the way, what's the worst is pursuing salvation, okay, and thinking you're doing that and actually doing that, but subtly it's a means to well-being. Like it really, in the end, it's really a means to well-being. That's the worst crap, right? Because
Yep.
you're close to salvation, so you think you're good and everything, but there's this subtle tweak, right at the end, where it's really going to be serving when it comes down to it well-being. Go ahead.
I think that you said something good. You've said this more than once. 2020 was clear. It's the cosmic test was on. And it's kind of like each day, if there's nobody around here, I have liberties in Christ, right? There's nobody looking over me. I have money. I got an internet, and what am I
Yeah,
going to do with my freedom? And America or the West has had prosperity for a long time. And it becomes part of how we do and how we think and how we kind of justify our own actions. Um, but to be frank, the mode of salvation is work. Our minds naturally wake up in the morning and what's going to give me the most pleasure and the most pain, and what do I want to get done first and stuff like that.
oh
And
yeah,
it really requires a sense of diligence, and part of it maybe is realizing God pretty much is being pretty open that we all are being tested right now. And I think the way we have to see this, how are you going to see yourself in relationship to the authority of the church and state right now? And part of it, I think we do have examples from tradition of how we can muddle through, but I do think that we really, to the point of exerting some pain, we have to, getting in the mode of salvation. There are simple things um, that we can do, like pray our rosary and kind of take some time that would have been our time and giving it to God and all these kind of nice sounding things. But it's constant. But as far as the idea of the cosmic test, I think you hit it. I think that's exactly what's going on, and that should kind of frame what's happening here in 2024. That we're all being tested, an individual and a collective test. America, the West, is, I would give it an F plus on how it's kind of doing in the international realm of moral leadership right now.
I do think there's a template, as you said, for dealing with this to some extent, but I also think, and I think you'd agree with me, there are elements, significant elements of what we're dealing with that are literally unprecedented, right? That we
Yes.
we don't have a template for. And
And the
what
reason,
does that mean? Like, if we don't have a template for it, that means we have to adopt a kind of like creativity and docility, a courage and a flexibility and a surrender that's on another level, right? Because like
yes.
God's gonna give us our marching orders minute by minute because there's not much of a template. I just think we have to prepare for this kind of level of guidance by God. I think it's going to come. I think the grace will come when we need it, but we gotta be ready to reject to put off the normal epistemological apparatus by which we use our prudence. I think we're going to have to really start getting ready to be docile to the gifts of the Holy Spirit. The gifts that just like tell you what to do and guide you like you just put your sails out and the wind blows you. I mean, I don't know. It just seems like we're going to have to be working with those pretty soon. I'm not saying turn off your reason and you know don't use deliberation and all that, but I mean, look, I was thinking to myself, like, can you even go back to 2019 and just even imagine what your mind was like back then? I have a hard time even remembering what I was like back then till now because of what it's like. I mean, it's unbelievable, and nothing, no one was except for the evil people, but none of us were predicting what 2020. It just was completely blindsided, and it's going to happen again. It's going to happen again. It must happen.
Yeah, the thought that kept coming through my mind as we're getting masks and 6 feet and the lies and the lockstep when every leader in the world, including Pope Francis, reading from the same script, I just kept saying to myself, even though I'm Dr. Deep State and I know what the agenda is, I just kept saying to myself, this is unreal. They're forcing
Right.
this unreality on us, and they're
Yeah.
continuing to. And I mean, the way they will, I don't want to get into this avenue, but Elon Musk going with Ben Shapiro over to the Middle East and celebrating in the middle of this, one of the most visible, massive domicides in the world, hauling his ass over there to sit there. And it's just a level of unreality and it keeps going
It
up.
is.
So how do you embrace reality? How do you get back to
Yeah.
reality? Truth, Christ. And, it requires at one time an openness of soul and just an openness to truth. But it also, I think, requires a warrior's mind to
Yes.
gird up with the tools of the Holy Spirit.
You got to put them both together. You got to put them both together. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. And many a pastor and many a priest has read through what the shield and the helmet and they're all perfect analogies of how you go to work with the evil one.
Yeah.
Will, what do you got?
Oh, sorry, I wasn't prepared there. That was a great.
No, sorry.
Yeah.
None of us are prepared. That's the point.
Yeah.
And a simple kind of idea is sometimes once we can kind of see the confusion and so forth in this test and in the age of lies, to literally sometimes just pray, God, your will, not mine. Please show me the direction you want me to walk. I mean, almost like show me the direction you want me to crawl through this unreality. And sometimes we just kind of forget because we think it's like tying our shoes. But I think we're getting to the point where this unreality is sinking on us that we have to be that level of vigilant to desire the truth and to desire that it's not ourselves therapeutically accepting the truth at convenient. Please let me know the hard truths that you want so I can walk in salvation.
Yeah.
And we can kind of start.
Probably
Go ahead,
wrap up in a few minutes. I got to teach.
Yes.
I got to get back to work.
Yes.
I'd like to be here all day, but I got. Yeah, just want to wrap it up. Maybe that would be good. A couple minutes. It's been very good, very enjoyable. Thank you.
Yeah. I think we got the big ideas and kind of hit the surface. I want to tell for anybody that's still hanging with us, I'm going to put my email in case you want to contact me or if you want to contact Dr.
You can put my
Kozinski
email
via
there too if you want. That's fine.
Okay, we're going to put some Substack articles. I'm going to put the link to In Pursuit of the Metaverse. I think if you just want to peruse Dr. Kozinski's forward, I think that's even available for free on Amazon. You can maybe go in there. I might be wrong about that, but we'll put that information. And I just really enjoyed getting together and going through some of these ideas again with you Thaddeus. Will, do you have any ideas that you'd like, just off shooting from the hip there, to pull everything together?
Nothing other than to say that was just a very fun conversation. I really appreciate you making the time, Dr. Kozinski, as always, and hopefully we get to do this again sooner rather than later. And I look forward to keeping track with your well-being versus salvation series and
All right.
your other writings.
And I encourage everybody to check out, we'll put a Substack link, and check out Dr. Kozinski's Substacks and any other articles or publications he's appeared in, if you're so interested. So at that, I think we're going to tie everything together. It's been, as I said, to start this whole thing, it's been a delight having you on. Thank you very much. I hope you and your family are doing well over there on the left coast. And just thank you very much for coming on. We've very much enjoyed having you again, Dr. Kozinski.
All right. Thanks, Dr. Haugen and Mr. Tucker. God bless you. Let's pray for each other. You need it.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Take care.
Thank you, sir.
Bye-bye. All right.